Hi, this is Taryn with Wonderfully Made Handcrafting, and I've had a lot of people message me about this reel that I did on Instagram on how I created this little coin pocket. Now, this was totally inspired by Susie at Shabby Soul, so definitely check her out as well. But I did want to get on here. I'm going to try to do a quick YouTube tutorial that's a little bit slower than the reel because I know the reel went really fast. However, I am getting ready to travel and head to the retreat location that I'm hosting my fall Bible journaling retreat at. And so I'm not sure I'm going to have time to do things like this glossy accent, but let's see what we can do. Okay, so it's actually been a number of days since I recorded that and filmed everything. And so now I'm doing the voiceover in New Hampshire at my parents' house. And so here I am going through with that collector die and making that coin pocket with one of the ByTheWell4God pattern papers. I also have these label dies that I've been absolutely loving. I ended up cleaning up the die with some rubbing alcohol, and that allows that ink to really stick to it. I use archival ink. That's the best thing to use, I've found. And I'm just rolling that through, making sure I get a good impression. I didn't get the best impression, so I'm actually going through again and making sure I get that one little corner. And then what's nice about these is that you can just stick it right back in. It just nests right back in perfectly. So I want to use this craft paper for the rest of the dies that I'm using on this coin pocket. So you see me here adding those little pieces to that craft paper. Now I know it may look like I've sped this up way too fast, but this is just die cutting, so I didn't want to just sit here and bore you cutting all these different pieces. But I did use one of those little tags from that collector set as well and added a little number 1 to it. So here is one of my favorite stamps from ByTheWell4God. I love it. It is actually Bible passages in the background of these floral pieces, and I want to create a fun mixed media background on this paper. This paper already has a mixed media look, but you can never have too much mixed media and grunge going on. So I'm making sure to line it up exactly where I want to place it. And then I'm also using this mint tape from scrapbook.com and making sure that that piece stays in place. I did stamp it first on just some regular white paper to make sure that it was stamping well, and then I just stamped it on this piece of paper, and then I'll put some clear embossing powder on top. You know, I love doing that. If you've watched any of my videos, I love using clear embossing powder over my VersaFine ink, and then I'll heat set that, and then we can work on adding all the rest of the grunge. I decided to break out my Daniel Smith watercolors. This is exactly what I did in my previous coin pocket. However, in that other coin pocket, the stamp I used was the floral one that was more vertical, and the florals were just more open and had more space to fill in with this watercolor. And so I think it looked a little bit better with the watercolor on the other coin pocket. This one, it just didn't want to take as much because there wasn't as much open space, especially with the embossing. It turned out okay, but it didn't turn out as great as I was hoping. So anyways, I do put that down, and then I make sure that it is good and dry so I can move on to my next step, in which I will break out my frayed burlap distress ink. Now, you know I use distress oxide a lot, but I've decided I really like this distress ink as well, and so I'm going over all the edges. I will fold these in to make sure to get those folded edges as well. While we're at it, I decide why not grunge it up even more, so I take out my distress oxide in frayed burlap and use that in the center pieces of this coin pocket. I also decide to take out my Distress Oxide Vintage Photo Spray, and I'll splatter some flecks down on the paper, make sure that's dry with my heat tool, and then I will come in with my Distress spray bottle and just do one of those half pull things where I get those bigger water droplets and add that to the paper as well, so it oxidizes some. I'll dry everything with my heat tool because the next step is what really pulls this whole project together, and I want to make sure that everything is dry and there's not more wetness in one area than the next. So I take out my Embossing Dabber from Tim Holtz, and I'm just going to dab around this whole sheet of paper or you can use also a circular motion. And I just want to make sure that everything is covered on this piece of paper. Then I'll take out my embossing glaze. The color I use is antique linen. I know it looks opaque right now, but don't worry, it is translucent once it's heat set. Now, if you don't have an embossing dabber, you could also use, Versa Magic or any other embossing ink with just, stamping the pad down on the paper. It just might not be as even. So here it is. This is what makes it, I think, and I am loving the plasticky almost look of this. So right now I'm making this a little bit darker on that craft paper with my frayed burlap distress ink, and then I'm actually going to come in and use a different color of embossing glaze on that little tag and the little circular pieces to hold the string. I think I use walnut stain, but I'm not positive. So I'm using that embossing dabber again, making sure that it's fully covered, and then I'll come in with my heat tool to heat set those. These little pieces were really tricky to heat set because they're so small and want to blow around everywhere. So I took one of my little craft picks and just held down these pieces. Now for these circular pieces, I just held down in the center. I didn't really care if it made an indentation or anything because I'll be poking a hole through that center anyhow. So now it's time to put this all together. I'm going to use my Barely Arts precision glue. Now you could use a glue like Fabri-Tac that would dry really fast. I always think precision glue dries fairly fast. However, it doesn't like plastic as much, so you just have to hold it there for a second. It does hold once it's dry. It just takes a little bit longer. So now I'm going to break out my ephemera booklet that I had created. These are all my Tim Holtz ephemera pieces, and I decided I wanted to use one of these little curator snippets. I just wanted to add something else to this front cover. With the other coin pocket that I had created, I had used glossy accents on a stamp and let it dry and everything, but I just didn't have time this time, and so I wanted to add those extra elements to make this coin pocket special without having to wait for that drying time. So you'll see me here add these little end pieces to hold the thread. I'm not sure what they're called, but I am punching a little hole through them with my little craft pick, and I am using little tiny brads to push through them to add something extra to the back side. And now I'll add my special little green embroidery thread to that back area, just making a figure 8, and then I will also add this little #1 tag that I created with some of the other collector dies that came in that set. The back side of that number tag still has that light brown craft paper, so I want to darken it up to make it look more normal, I guess. And so I take my distress ink and frayed burlap and just add a little bit of darkness to that back side, so in case it flips, it doesn't look awkward or out of place. So now I'm taking these really tiny little alphas that were just released from ByTheWell4God, and I am spelling out pray on this little label tag. Now with these little tiny alphas, they are so cute but a little tricky to use. My tip is to take a piece of paper on the side and just get the feeling of what it feels like to press these down, because you don't want to press too hard. So I always take my letters and just make sure that they're in the right orientation first when I stamp on that paper, but also just get that feeling correct. I loved what Lindsay did with her alcohol inks and masking and scotch tape, and so I decided to do my own versions, and I loved this masking tape and how it turned out. So I'm adding that to give it some more texture to the front of this card and more of a mixed media look. I did want to darken up this little pray label though, so I did add some ground espresso spray to it and just dabbed it up quickly so it didn't get too dark. I also had this vintage button from a House of Books subscription, and it added the perfect finishing touch to this little cluster. I was really looking for something extra that added some dimension, and so that definitely helped me out there. Now to finish this coin pocket up, I did want to do the same thing that I did on my last coin pocket, and that is add some Crypt grit paste. Now, this is my little container from last year. They are making it in a much larger size this year, which I have that as well, because I love this stuff. This stuff goes on kind of gray with black flecks in it, but it dries more of a greenish clear, and it just adds the perfect texture to anything you want to look grungy. So I'm adding that to the front and the back. Then I do have to wait for it to dry, but after that, this little coin pocket will be done. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe. You can also follow me over on Instagram at Wonderfully Made Handcrafting. I'll try to link everything I use down below in the description, and I'll also link Lindsay's video on how she created these alcohol ink, masking, and scotch tape. They are beautiful. You don't want to miss it. I hope you have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.